Though the walk back was not far, it was quiet and tense. Ziza kept her hand on Kina's shoulder the entire time, only coming off to open the door and hold it open for the little bird. Once it was shut behind them, though, the hobgoblin broke into an enormous grin. "That was splendid! I am so proud of you. Oh, what a glorious sight to watch him be forced to swallow his own words." She stooped down to scoop up the Kenku in a rib-crushing hug. The momentum of the embrace stalled slightly, however, when Ziza realized that Kina was shaking and breathing heavier than normal. "What is wrong?" Ziza's tone was unsure if she was even correct to assume something was wrong. Kina returned to the embrace for a few seconds, trying to use the rock-solid form of Ziza to ground herself. She closed her eyes tight, taking what deep breaths she could, and feeling an acute surge of frustration that she couldn't talk and hug at the same time. Just one more reason that this crystal had to work. Withdrawing from the embrace, Kina swiftly withdrew her tome. As she flipped to a new page, her heart dropped into her stomach. She was running out of pages. Swallowing heavily, she wrote, "I talked. I stole voices. I did the one thing I don't want to do. I couldn't stop myself. I just got so angry and it all started coming out. I feel queasy." Remembering that Kina had declined to even borrow her voice, Ziza became uncertain of what to do next. She needed time to come up with something, but she couldn't leave the Kenku alone. Gently guiding her to the back wall, she leaned the two of them against it before dragging her down to slump on the floor next to her. The silence was long as the hobgoblin searched for words of her own. Learning how to deal with people was not easy, so she tried an approach she was used to. "In a battle, sometimes we don't get to do the right things to win," Ziza said slowly, but as best as she could, from the heart. "We have to use the tools at our disposal. It's never so easy, but we won't survive if we reject things when they become the only option." Kina clacked her beak softly and wrote, trying to keep her passages short. "I'm not a soldier, Ziza. I see your point, but that doesn't mean I have to like it." The hobgoblin nodded solemnly. "I didn't say you did, but you are not wrong for doing so. At least to me. That man had to hear his words to and about you. If he hadn't, well, I cannot promise he will change, but maybe he will now. And I was willing to lend my voice." Kina blinked, her vision misting over again. She had forgotten that, in truth. It hadn't come up since her first day in this workshop. Wiping away a tear that formed, she pressed herself against Ziza's side, releasing a quiet sigh and nodding her head. She closed her book. She didn't need it for her meaning to be clear this time. Ziza returned to the gesture, maintaining the peaceful moment for a few minutes before speaking again. "We rest until tomorrow. Then we rebuild the device and shape the crystal." Kina smiled weakly and closed her eyes. The day had barely begun, and already she felt like she could sleep for a century. And since she had permission, and she had done it once already, one more word borrowed from Ziza couldn't hurt. "Splendid." With a chuckle, the hobgoblin picked up the exhausted Kenku and carried her to the borrowed room. Laying her on top of the bed, she went to close the blinds, glancing over her shoulder at Kina, before leaving the room and closing the door behind her. It had been a while since Ziza had done any gem cutting. She had stayed up rather late to dig out the equipment buried beneath all of her tinkering and forging gear. With the guidebook to cut shape sitting before Kina, the artificer waited patiently for the Kenku to rein in her excitement enough to pick one for the choker. If this was indeed the final draft, then she wanted her young friend to like the style that she would be wearing, potentially for the rest of her life. In the end, Kina had settled on something largely unassuming and plain. The final cut of the gem would be a simple four-sided diamond shape, set into an otherwise dull-colored metal choker, as before. No frills, no embellishments, and even a little lid to hide the gem from view. Her reasoning being that she didn't want to draw attention to it from the wrong crowd. She didn't want anyone to steal it, especially since it would be hugging her throat at all times. She had had enough trouble with that part of herself for one lifetime, thank you very much. As usual, Ziza insisted on Kina learning the techniques and doing it together. It had become a lot easier since they had first started tinkering with each other. Between the strong instruction and her familiarity with the tools now, the chisels made short work of carving the crystal. With it now set into place, Ziza clasped it around Kina's neck and stepped back with a heavy, but hopeful, sigh. "Are you ready?" Kina touched the choker carefully, a tiny tremor of uncertainty creeping up her spine. The memory of their last test flashed through her mind, and for a second she could smell her own burning skin and feathers. She was quick to jot down her worries on one of the few remaining pages of her tome. "We are sure it won't blow up this time. We did all the math and stuff correctly." "We did," Ziza assured her with a confident nod. "Arcane crystals are much simpler things and cannot handle complex tasks without several. Soul crystals are made of condensed spirit energy from the ethereal plane. Once it attunes to you, it should act like a natural extension of your own body." Kina nodded and tucked the tome back into its pouch. Then, puffing up her chest to make herself feel big, she flicked the talk switch. As before, there was a short burst of static, and then the humming against her throat. She tensed for a moment, expecting searing pain and an explosion of shrapnel getting stuck in her throat. But there was nothing. Just the hum.
"So far, so good,"
she thought. She took in one more deep breath and closed her eyes.
"Moment of truth."
She opened her beak.
"Hello?"
Her eyes snapped wide, and a hand found its way to her neck. She didn't know that voice. It was raspy and shrill, and reverberated faintly as if spoken into a metal cup, but otherwise clear. She looked around, her first impulse being to see if someone else had entered the room. But there was no one. Just her and Ziza, who was now wearing an increasingly large grin.
"Hello, Kina,"
the hobgoblin said with awe and relief, a slight shimmer in her eyes as she teared up a little.
"It's nice to hear you."
Kina stared at Ziza, her mind taking a second to process. She lowered her head and opened her beak again.
"It worked?"
she asked, the words coming out haltingly, audibly artificial. She clicked her beak and spoke again.
"It worked. It worked. My voice! This is my voice! This is..."
She opened her beak two-eyed. The resultant shout was loud enough to make her ears hurt, and she clamped her beak shut. But even with her ears ringing, there was no stopping the buildup of moisture in her eyes. She lifted her view to Ziza, smiling wide.
My name is Kina, and it's nice to hear me too.
Ziza was once again speechless. The hardened face was split into a loving smile as she crossed the room. She fell to her knees with tears streaming down her face as she hugged the Kenku tightly. Her voice was barely a whisper as she held her tight.
You did it. You really did it.
Kina returned the hug.
Me? I hardly did anything. I just held stuff for you. This is all you, Ziza. Thank you.
She murmured, then blinked as she listened to her voice.
It's gonna take me some time to get used to that as my voice.
Maybe. The hobgoblin held her at arm's length, so that she could see Kina and the choker as they worked.
But this is yours. You made it. I know you could replicate it yourself if you had to. As you told me when we met, you have a great memory.
Kina giggled, then giggled louder when she heard what her laughter sounded like. She sounded silly. She shook herself and beamed at Ziza.
Maybe I'd remember how to remake it, but I'm a humble little farmer. I don't have a workshop, or tools, or a crystal worth 300 gold lying around. So if I ever do have to get a new one, is it safe to assume I can come to you again?
As if struck by a sudden realization, Ziza's shoulders slumped a bit. She recovered quickly, but there was an edge of sadness in her voice.
You are always welcome in my shop and home. The bedroom has been used by you more than me at this point.
Kina smiled broadly at that.
Do you think I could persuade you to come visit me and my family? I'm probably gonna get grounded for running off the way I did, but I think my family would want to meet the woman who gave their daughter a voice of her own. I'd love to introduce you. Plus,
she nudged Ziza in the shoulder.
You could do with a vacation. I see how you work.
The tears welled up in her eyes again. She tried to regain her stoic demeanor, but happily failed at it.
It would be my honor to meet your family and defend you against the tides of grounding.
Kina cackled merrily and threw herself against Ziza for another hug.
Word of advice? Don't get in an argument with my mom. You will lose. Why do you think I had to sneak out to do this? Hobgoblins do not shy from a challenge,
Ziza huffed.
But if I lose, it will be by her skill and she will have earned it.
Kina pecked her on the shoulder.
Not everything is a fight. This is why you need a vacation, you darn workaholic.
The hobgoblin gave a mock scowl and sighed. A brief moment passed before she muttered to herself,
Maybe I'll find an orc to wrestle.
Kina made a face.
Ew!
She groaned before giggling and extracting herself from the hug.
Well, Hopping Goblin, when do we go?
Ziza laughed, a hearty and earnest laugh.
Oh, I shall never escape that, shall I?
Then her face froze, and she slowly raised an eyebrow.
You've been here all this time without permission?
Kina blinked.
I mean, I left them a note saying where I'd gone, so they won't think I suddenly went missing, but no, I don't have permission to be here. Did I not make that clear? I thought I did.
With a grimace of guilt, Ziza chuckled nervously.
We should probably go as soon as we can.
Kina shared that nervous chuckle.
Probably, yeah.
The two nodded vigorously before hurrying off to pack. Kina's things were easy, being in one place and all, but she was finding that she had more now than when she arrived. Ziza, on the other hand, was struggling to find clothes that hadn't been scorched and weren't covered in soot or grease. As Ziza was busy scrounging up clothes and supplies for the journey, Kina found herself waiting in the workshop where all of the work had been done. She gingerly procured her tome from its place strapped to her chest. She looked it over with a fond smile. It wasn't the first tome she had had. She'd gone through several. But it occurred to her that this one might very well be the last. It would join the others under her bed back home. If anyone ever got to read them after she was gone, she decided it wouldn't do to leave them hanging. And so she popped it open and wrote a final entry.
If you're reading this, first of all, rude. Second of all, it worked. I have a voice now. One that's mine. I don't know if I am the only Kenku to arrive at a solution like this, but I hope I am not the last. My name is Kina, and I'll speak for myself. Bye!
With a smile and her heart blazing warm in her chest, she closed the book.